Okay, we're going to get started. I'm trying to keep it on time, even though I was the one that was just late right now. So come on back. Okay, well, this is a really great progression because Lauren was talking about green roofs and referred to the Wildflower Center a number of times, and it just so happens that our next speaker is from the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. And Jonathan Garner, he has a master's degree in landscape architecture from the University of Oklahoma, and also a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Science and Arts of Oklahoma. He is in charge, he oversees the Sustainable Sites Initiative and has been instrumental in doing the version 2 of it. And so he's here today to give us a big picture overview about sustainable sites. And then Heather Benhouse, who will be here after lunch, is going to talk about some examples of sustainable sites and how she's applied that in the real world. So please welcome Jonathan Garner.
Hello, how's everyone doing? Good. Thank you, Denise, for that intro. Beautiful facility. This is my first time to be in here, so I'm really excited about this. So I'm going to talk to you today about the Sustainable Sites Initiative. Has anyone ever heard of the Sustainable Sites Initiative? Good, lots of you. Anybody ever used it? A little bit? No? It's a volume book this thick that it's excellent reading at night. I worked very hard to provide that challenge to you all. One quick correction. I've been at the Wildflower Center since 2012. I was hired as a program coordinator for the Sustainable Sites Initiative. My role has since transitioned to now be the professional development coordinator. Danielle Pieranunzi, who you see up here on the name on the screen, she is the director of the sites program. She couldn't be here today. But there's her contact information. If you have any further questions, you can reach out to either one of us. Danielle's in sites each and every day. I'm in sites every now and then when it pertains to speaking to professional audiences such as yourself. Real briefly, at the Wildflower Center, as Lauren mentioned, we have a lot of different research initiatives going on. This is our turf grass in the top left, the turf grass mix that we've developed. You can see we've done a lot of work even with NASA to restore some native prairies. This is one of the green roofs that we've worked on. This is the one that the gentleman asked about being on a slope. This is our growing media that we are currently under patent pending for that. It's about a 4.5-inch growing media. You can see it works on a slope. And this was designed to basically create a seamless transition between the prairie, the ground plane, the actual soil depth up to the roof and make that nice transition for that roof. We also offer in the bottom left, we also offer, if you haven't been out there, lots of different varieties of gardens to inspire homeowners how to use native plants in a variety of ways. We do a lot of research on roadways. This was Mrs. Johnson's kind of biggest campaign, is to beautify our highways and our byways. One program that we've also been working on for the past 15 years is a prescribed fire program, putting fire back into the landscape as a management tool. It's very important, and we're finding a lot of important data for restoring and managing native landscapes, native prairies, by using prescribed fire as a management tool. And then one of our last greatest successes, opened in May 2014, is the family garden. You see the large picture here on the right. If you haven't been out here, this is a 4.5-acre park-like setting that's for families. It's for children to get out and to explore nature in a more, I don't want to say the word natural, but I'm going to say natural setting in a way that challenges young people from an early age of barely being able to walk up to junior high, high school, even parents, grandparents, provides opportunities for them to interact together in a nature setting and learn a lot of things about nature, just kind of an inherent process that I'm sure many of you grew up with in the same setting, and that's probably a portion of you, that's what's led you to be here today, is having that type of background growing up. So one other thing that we've done at the Wallflower Center is that we have worked with a team of 3 individuals ourselves. We've collaborated with the United States Botanic Garden and the American Society of Landscape Architects to develop the Sustainable Sites Initiative. This is a program that began in 2007 and has been ongoing since then. If you know about the LEED rating system for buildings, then what happened is that there are a few pieces of the LEED rating system for buildings that addresses the landscape. When that was first published, our team, predecessors of mine, approached the United States Green Building Council and said, what about the landscape? There's a tremendous amount of opportunity here that's being missed. They said to us, you guys are the experts, why don't you develop it? We said, thank you. That's all we needed was the green light from you all. And we went forth and collaborated with these 2 other organizations to develop the first system. So I'll give you a brief background on what the Sustainable Sites Initiative is. So when we take a look at land development and land management practices, we see a situation like this happen a lot nowadays, right? So this is an image that is not a split screen. This is not one image of a bunch of crazy sprawl and a beautiful preserve. This is a single image with one highway going between the 2 parcels. On the left-hand side of the image is a Native American preserve, and on the right-hand side is what we see, typical suburban sprawl that's been happening since the mid to late 80s, probably. When this is done, when this type of development and management is done, we lose a lot of our natural resources. We compound the problems that we're seeing a lot in our native environments, such as the introduction and the sort of takeover from invasive species. As you see here, this is kudzu, one of the most aggressive invasive species plants that we have out there. We have tremendous amount of watering. I don't want to say requirements because they're not requirements. These are kind of watering. This irrigation is needed to maintain these types of landscapes that we're designing, that we're developing. I like to think of these landscapes as those that are on life support, because if you were to take away a lot of these inputs, such as this tremendous amount of irrigation, a lot of pesticide, fertilizer use, then you're taking away that life source that those landscapes need to survive, and they'll eventually die and go into disrepair. We also see a lot of pollution that's happening because of tremendous amount of runoff by removing our pervious surfaces, putting down impervious surfaces such as streets and roadways that take us out to these faraway places, and even just developing many of our urban areas, our plazas. We're removing a lot of landscape, a lot of green, and replacing it with hardscape that contributes to runoff. That picks up a lot of pollution, gets into our waterways, and causes a tremendous amount of problems. The biggest of those problems is the amount of energy that's required by a city municipality to treat that water as wastewater and to cleanse it. It's estimated that about 30% of a municipality's overall energy spending is in a wastewater treatment facility to treat and clean that water. Contributing to that, treating water as a waste product rather than what we can actually do with it and treat it as a resource is a leading problem to some of today's landscape issues. We're also seeing the removal of impervious surface contributing to heat island effect. I think we can all sense that when we're here in downtown Austin on a hot August day, the effects of heat islands and how that can, in other environments, how that can be mitigated through the use of providing more green space. And then lastly, taking a look at some of our construction sort of mode of operations. It's kind of typical to strip the landscape of all its natural resources, create it like a tabula rasa, a blank slate, and begin from the beginning rather than taking a look at what we have to offer on the site as we inherit the site and how we can use those resources and maximize what we can do with that in the landscape. So what I'm talking about here in a larger context is what we have sort of coined this term called ecosystem services. Any of you ever heard of this term? Okay, good. So these services are benefits that we get from nature. It's things that provide us with a lot of the support that we need to continue our lives. They're free. A lot of times these are resources that aren't counted in a bottom line budget sheet. These are something that are offered to you to improve your quality of life, but since they're free, then they are not primarily concerned with in a lot of accounting methods, and then so it's easy to kind of ignore them or push them aside when we start to develop our landscapes. So these services include things like our regulating services, such as the images on the left-hand side, providing clean air, providing clean water, cleansing those two environments so that we can breathe, so that we can have fresh water to drink. They provide in the top right some of our provisioning services, providing habitat for our pollinator species so that we can actually have food available to us. And then one that's often kind of not mentioned is this idea of cultural services, providing places for people to be outside, enjoy nature, connect with one another in a social context, provide environments for people to receive mentally restorative qualities from being in a nice, pleasing environment, and what that can do to our sort of daily take on life, remove some of the stress, and offer us a better quality of life. So at sites, we approach this idea of designing and developing landscapes to be more sustainable by looking at what we call high-performance landscapes. And a little bit later after lunch, my predecessor, Heather Vinhouse, is going to talk to you a little bit more about high-performance landscapes and two particular facets of those. But I want to give sort of a context and overview of what I'm talking about here. So we're looking at approaching the landscape in 4 different methods of operation. The first is conserving, going about a means of approaching a landscape through the lens of conservation. So when we approach the site, I'm going to use this tree as an example to mimic any ecosystem service that's available on the landscape. So when we approach the site, we see a healthy resource, something that's existing on site. It's doing a great service. You see the performance of the landscape is already at a high measure. What we want to do is we want to protect that resource during the development of the project by putting a fence or some sort of immovable border around that resource. Now, this could be a tree, this could be a community of healthy plants, this could be a natural water source that is thriving and doing well. This could be healthy soil that we have found through various types of testing. Any of these natural resources, we want to conserve them, protect them as they are on the site, and then as we go into the future conditions of the site, we see that the performance of the landscape continues to improve, continues to increase. And what I mean by the performance of the landscape, I'm simply talking about those ecosystem services. What are those ecosystem services that are on the site, and how can we conserve them so that they continue to give those resources to us and continue to build up and improve those resources for us. The next hierarchy is management of the landscape. So again, approaching the project site from the beginning, finding something such as possibly an invasive species on the site that is beginning to decline the landscape in a way by pulling resources from those natural, healthy, existing sources there, taking a look at those and what we can do with them. During site development, we want to remove or find a means to control those resources, or those things that are stressing the site. And then also you can see we put up a border around the things that are existing so that we can protect those. So this is kind of a dual management system here of we're removing or controlling something that's causing harm while at the same time conserving and protecting something that's doing good. And as we see here, the performance of the landscape in the future conditions long term continues to improve. The next sequence would be to restore. We oftentimes come across a site that has been degraded or damaged. The health of the site is declining. The performance of the landscape is at a very low level because previous practices or just simply the introduction of invasive species or something is stressing the site and has caused a lot of those natural resources to go away, a lot of those ecosystem services to go away. And so we want to find out what those are, what they were, and find ways to restore them back on site. So during site development, it might be something simply as planting native or appropriate vegetation. It might be restoring a creek corridor or a stream bank, something that's going to provide those ecosystem services back to the site the way they were in their original historic conditions. And then we can see here very quickly the ecosystem services of that site, the performance of that landscape quickly improves and provides back to us what was once lost. And then lastly, if all other conditions are not existing on site, we have a tremendous opportunity to generate ecosystem services where they were not once there. So approaching the site, seeing the possibilities that are available, and introducing ecosystem services. Again, these could be regulating services, they could be provisioning services like providing habitat for pollinator species, they could be cultural services that provide habitat or a place to go for people to enjoy. Any of these ecosystem services I've mentioned before, there's possibilities on each and every site to generate those, and you can see that quickly the performance of the landscape increases. Any questions about that? We can stop, you can interrupt me, feel free, ask me anything. Great, keep moving on. So taking that hierarchy of how we make decisions as we design and develop our landscapes, that's what led to sort of this creation of the Sustainable Sites Initiative. And what we've done is, starting in 2007, we released a preliminary report. That went out to the public. We received feedback on that, used that feedback to kind of edit and make changes, and we released the draft guidelines in 2008. This was kind of the first full set of guidelines for people to take a look at and use. Again, receiving feedback from the public, that led us to fully develop the rating system into the first version. We call this V1, the Guidelines of Performance Benchmarks. This was released in 2009. And this was a rating system that was available for people to access, but we also wanted to test it. We wanted to see how it actually worked and performed in the landscape and in the marketplace. So we created a pilot program. This program began in 2010. We had about 350 applicants from project sites that were all across the world. Most of those obviously here in the United States, but we also had interest from Iceland, Spain, Canada, and some in Mexico as well. You can see sort of the breakdown here of what each of those project types were. In the end, we ended up taking around 150 of those 350 applicants to kind of green light them and say, go ahead and continue the development of your project using this rating system, test it, send it through the works and see how it actually works for you. You can see the mix here. A quarter of the projects were open space projects. It's kind of typical in landscape architecture and landscape design using open space. But also to note, 13% were residential and 6% of those were government projects. Of those 150, and I mentioned the government projects because that's a very unique case where you have public funding that had to go with sort of funding the project to be under review and certification. That's kind of a tricky thing to do, but we had some nice collaborations between public and private partnerships that were able to push those projects through. These 150 projects that were tested, we have certified 47 of those under this first rating system. That pilot program has now concluded. It ended in 2015 was our last round of reviews for projects. You can see here sort of just a mix of all the different types of projects. Our smallest project is around 0.15 acres, and the largest is upwards of 126 acres. Again, projects all across the United States. We have in the top left, Washington, D.C. In the bottom right, that's in Burbank, California. The middle of the bottom, that's in Florida. Going over to the left, that's in New Mexico. Yes. The other 80 or so that didn't get certified, there was, through the process of review, either because of where the project might have been at the time that the Radiance System was released. Sometimes projects take upwards of 10 years to get developed. Some of those were kind of in the middle of their project already, and going back and having to backtrack for documentation put a lot of them at risk for not being able to continue their certification. It's both and. Some didn't meet the criteria that we needed. I'll show you an example here in just a second of what that is. But then others were too far along in the process to go back and document some of the processes that we needed to show that they were doing these things that we've asked them to do. And they decided we're too far in the process to do this, but we will use this information for our next project and start from the beginning. So we have a mix of urban environments. We have a mix of nature preserves, residential right there in the center. That's a residential project, about a 2-acre large site. And then the one to the right of it, that's actually in San Francisco, and it's kind of a rooftop plaza for an apartment building. I'm sorry? The bottom left. That's the Bat Cave draw and nature preserve in Carlsbad. Yeah, in New Mexico. It's kind of a weird picture because that's the entrance into the cave, and you can see just barely the switchbacks that you have to walk down. So it's kind of an aerial photo, even though it looks like it's a tricky photo. I'll let you wrap your minds around that in a moment. Everybody there? Everybody with me? Okay. Here's a sort of a breakdown of where most of those projects are. You can see there's quite a few of them in Texas. This map needs to be updated because we now have 6 projects that have been certified in Texas. The closest one is in Winburley at Blue Hole Regional Park. Anybody ever been there? Have you been there within the past 2 years? Past 3 years? Yeah. So a lot of the restoration of that project, they followed the guidelines, and that's why you see a lot of the things that you see there. Yes? It did, yeah. Held up very well with the floods. A big reason why is because in previous conditions, all the area where you normally go to kind of hang out on the grass before, as you're swimming, that area used to be heavily compacted because people drove their RVs down there. I mean, this is the 70s in Austin, right? That's what people did. You just pull up and hang out for a few days. So they removed all of that kind of traffic, restored all those soils, restored the bank along the creek to provide the floodplain functions that are necessary to withstand major events like flooding. So. And then one last thing to note about this breakdown of projects is that 31 were grayfield, or what we call a previously developed site. 8 of them were brownfield sites, and only 8 were greenfield. This first time the site has ever been developed. And then you see the breakdown there of the context between urban, suburban, and rural projects. And then here's a quick breakdown of the size of each of the projects that have been certified. You can see most of them are less than 1 acre to 5 acres. And then we have a big jump there between 6 and 100 acres. I'm not real sure why. But we have 15 that fall in that category. And then 3 that are over 100 acres, which is a pretty big site. So lessons that we learned from the pilot program as we began to go into another round of revisions to get to where we are today. You can see here we needed to refine the technical content, improve the clarity. A lot of times we needed to provide more guidance on a lot of things that we needed to explain to, or what people were asking. We needed more guidance in the rating system itself. The documentation proved to be a pretty large task for a lot of individuals. Most of our projects were completed by landscape architecture firms or a combination of landscape architecture, civil engineering, architecture. But we also had a few that were just kind of residential landscape designers that were needing some more clarification on what kind of documentation was needed. We also wanted to combine our credits with some of the similar goals that are in the LEED rating system. So if a project has a building on site and they're pursuing the LEED rating system, how does that look with combination of also pursuing site certification, and where there's some overlap and where we can kind of streamline that process to make it easier for project teams. We also introduced a few new credits. These were ideas that were brought to us out of the pilot program, such as producing food on site, having an actual working garden on site, or minimizing pesticide and fertilizer use. Those are a couple of new credits in the rating system. And then just to kind of fine-tune the weighting system, this is what we use to kind of evaluate each credit in the rating system to see how many points we should allocate for doing that. And again, all of that falls back on this idea of that hierarchy of conserve, manage, restore, and generate. What is impacting the ecosystem services that are on the site, and how can we weight against those? So we developed 4 major goals here. I'll let you read those, but these goals were kind of the standard that we sent every single credit through to kind of see how does it meet the mark of each of these goals? Which credit, or how does this credit meet this goal? And through that process, that long process, we were to develop a weighting system for how many points you could get in each credit. So here it is. This is version 2 of the site rating system. This was released in July 2014 and has been out in the marketplace for people to use. Anybody can use this. It's typically used by landscape architects, civil engineers, architecture firms, restoration biologists, a professional audience such as that. But also it's something that can be applicable in the work that each of you are doing, if you're not in one of those professional categories. If you are out there sort of in the masses of doing design work, construction, implementation of landscapes, this is something that is also eligible for you. The blue copy here on the left, that's the rating system itself. It's a trimmed down version of what we call of the image on the right, which is the reference guide. This has a tremendous amount of resources available in it. The reference guide is for sale. The rating system itself is free to download from the website. All right, so I've been talking a lot about credits, and I haven't yet explained exactly how those work. So in the rating system itself, we have 10 sections. These are sections that pertain to all aspects of design and development, and also operations and maintenance, what happens after the design is done and the construction, the whole project is built and it's open. Operations and maintenance are a big key to ensuring the longevity of the site, ensuring that those future conditions of the site, the performance of the landscape continues to improve. So you can see here the breakdown of what those sections are. And if you look at it in sort of a process of typical kind of landscape design development, we start with site selection, finding the site, seeing what's happening on site, going through that pre-design assessment to evaluate what we have on site that's healthy and existing, or what needs to be restored or managed or generated, and then finding ways that we can work with what's on site to improve those conditions without having to start from a very blank slate. When you move into design, development, and construction, we're looking at 5 categories here of site design. water to begin with, which is the third icon there, and then soil and vegetation are in one section itself because of the symbiotic relationship between soils and plants. Then we have materials, and then we have human health and well-being. And again, that goes back to those cultural services that are provided through a landscape. Once you're through design development and construction documentation, that gets turned over to the contractor. Having the specific criteria for the contractor to pay attention to while developing the site is very key because there can be a lot of degradation that happens to a site through site development, such as compacting soil, damaging a lot of natural resources like vegetation or waterways, releasing a lot of chemicals on the site, unfortunately through maybe like filling up a construction vehicle with gas or diesel. So there's a lot of criteria there that we pay attention to. And then we also ask construction contractors to restore soils, to restore some of those natural resources that have been damaged through either previous site development or during site development. We understand, we know that you can't protect everything while you're developing a site, that things will be compacted, things will happen. So we just ask that whatever damage is done, that it gets restored so that the performance of the landscape increases. And then after construction, once the site is open, having your operations manager, your landscape manager, maybe even some of you people who may be in the landscape management business, providing a detailed set of instructions for the care of that specific landscape. One example of that is we had a project that went through 3 landscape managers because when the project site was opened, there was a landscape manager hired, and that person thought that they knew how to manage that landscape based on previous experiences coming from Florida, and they were working in Texas. That didn't work out so well because the landscape is completely different. So another landscape manager was brought on, same kind of issue, trying to manage a landscape from previous experience somewhere else versus what's actually happening on site. Finally, the third landscape manager got a hold of the manual, found out exactly what needed to happen on the site, and the site is continuing to do better because the management is detailed for that site specifically. And then another section of the rating system is the education and the monitoring. Any education opportunities that are available to teach the public. The Family Garden at the Wildflower Center is a certified site. We use that landscape to teach families about the importance of sustainable landscapes, actually what that means, how we're treating, how we're managing that landscape. That's an example of an education initiative. And then we're also doing some monitoring because of some of the practices that we implemented on the landscape, such as we're using harvested rainwater to irrigate with. We're using non-potable water to irrigate with. And so we're tracking that. We're keeping a monitoring log of the health of our plants, how they're working with that type of irrigation system rather than something differently. And that all kind of goes together to provide points in the rating system. So the suitability for for the site's rating system is any project that's under new construction or major renovation. We don't have a maximum size. As you saw there, we have some projects up to 140 acres, but there is a minimum requirement of 2,000 square feet. And again, these projects can be anywhere in the world. The rating system is written so that the information that you have to pay attention to is pertinent to your ecoregion, rather than just setting kind of a standard bar for what can happen anywhere in the world. Obviously, case in point, Austin only receives 31 inches of rainfall annually on average, versus Seattle that receives 2.5 times more than that. So what works in Seattle doesn't work here. Same thing that whatever works here doesn't work in somewhere like Portugal or something, right? So understanding what is happening on your site, the context of your site, understanding your ecoregion. We've set all the thresholds, all the bars for developing the site based on that information, not just sort of a blanket threshold for everybody. And then lastly, sort of what was mentioned previously in a question is early engagement of the rating system from the beginning of the project rather than kind of coming in midstream and trying to adapt your design idea or your plan for the site to the rating system. Instead, use the rating system to sort of plan and guide the design development of the site. We're seeing this picked up a lot more now in the government's eyes, the federal government's eyes. You can see here the Incorporating Natural Infrastructure and Ecosystem Services. This is a report that was published in 2015. It's calling for the protection and the restoration of ecosystem services on landscapes. This is something that the Sustainable Sites Initiative addresses directly, and it's sort of an answer to a call that's being put out by the federal government. Also from the Council on Environmental Quality, the guidance on federal agencies on sustainable practices for design landscapes. This is kind of putting a call out to any government entity to design their landscapes on their federal campuses to be more sustainable and to support the pollinators that are within that region. So we're seeing this is sort of part and parcel to what happened with the LEED rating system. Now it's a requirement for all new federal government buildings to achieve a certain LEED rating system for the building. It's beginning, the Sustainable Sites Initiative is beginning to gain traction in the same vein, and we hope to see that it will become common practice for federal landscapes. Yes? Question, is there any tax incentive for doing Sustainable Sites Initiative? Right now there's not that we know of. If there is, it would be in a municipality that is key to sites and is adopting our initiatives into sort of their protocol and providing tax incentives. We've not heard of any yet. But again, if we continue the same traction that LEED has kind of set for us, then we anticipate that there will be eventually tax credits for doing this. Yeah. And we're to questions.
In your experience, where's the I guess no turning back point in the phase of a project where implementation wouldn't be practical?
Did everybody hear the question? In my experience or my opinion, there would be the turning point, I guess, of where it's not practical to pursue sites.
When would it not be practical to try to implement sites in a project?
Yeah. One of the biggest requirements, and let me flip back to this screen. I'll show you. So in the rating system here, we have a series of prerequisites and credits. There are 18 prerequisites. Every project that pursues sites has to meet the threshold for each of these prerequisites. If you can't meet one of those prerequisites, I would say that that's kind of the first step of saying we're not going to be able to pursue sites. This could be something like protecting a wetland or not impacting a floodplain. But also there's a requirement there to have what we call an integrated design team. So rather than just the landscape designer being the only people working on the project, incorporating a civil engineer, an architect if you have a building, getting your clients and your stakeholders involved in the project development, bringing in your operations manager from the very beginning to say, we want to design this and we want to have it look this way. Can you manage it? Can you maintain it for future years to make sure that that works? Having those individuals, having your construction contractor involved in the very beginning process, having the series of sort of team meetings and team collaboration to develop the project from the beginning, that's one of the key components to making this work. And if you don't set up that integrated design team, then you have a greater potential to not achieve certification. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
So I actually kind of have two.
Okay.
Do you have a section that prevents people from altering the site substantially after becoming certified? Like, what keeps a site certified person from just going, you know what, we want to put in a bunch of high maintenance plants in a small area or whatever? What prevents that sort of thing from happening?
You're asking sort of in the sense of you've achieved certification and you're 2, 3, 10 years into project development. What would prevent someone from doing something that wasn't initially certified?
Yeah.
Nothing. In a sense, nothing. Yeah, in a word, nothing. We haven't developed the Radiance System that far to have sort of a checks and balances to go back and make sure that things are happening the way they need to. I'm not familiar with that necessarily in any LEED projects either.
Okay.
But that could just be my naivety with LEED right now. One of the sections with the performance monitoring is that we do ask for, if projects pursue that credit, there are a host of different areas that they can monitor, and then depending on what they choose, we're asking them to submit data from anywhere from 6 months up to 3 years of performance monitoring, and then publish that in some type of professional journal, present it at a conference or a symposium or something of that nature.
And I'm certain you have a wide variety of credits for protecting wildlife as well as insect populations. Do you mostly focus on pollinators, or have you taken into consideration other things such as ground beetles, their benefits too?
That's actually one of the prerequisites in the first section, site context. It's to protect habitat for threatened and endangered species, and we're talking about flora and fauna here. So it's actually required for all projects to do a habitat assessment to see if there are any endangered or threatened species on site, and then protect them through site development and into construction and operations. So we're looking at everything across the board.
Okay, Thank you.
All right, that was my last question, so thank you all for your time and attention. Oh, maybe one more? No? Oh, no. Right. The question was about a site's accreditation as an accredited professional. Much like now you can achieve a LEED accreditation for a professional. That's in the works. That's something that has been asked for quite a bit since we released version 2. I believe there are some task force meetings that are beginning to happen as early as February to develop what that looks like. I anticipate a rollout of that probably by the end of this year, if not early 2017. I think they're a little behind schedule than what they originally wanted, but it's happening, it's working, it's being developed right now. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I just wanted to mention that the City of Austin staff, we're actually having a meeting next week about using sustainable sites more on city projects. So we don't have incentives yet, but we can talk about that. Or no. It's time for lunch. There's lots of great restaurants around here. There's also the boardwalk on the other side of the lake if you want to go for a walk. We designated an hour and 15 minutes to give you plenty of time so you don't have to rush. You can talk to some of the participants, but just please come back here and be ready at 1 o'clock. And thank you.